Welcome to Dialogue. China's economy has exceeded expectations, posting 5.3% growth in the first half of the year. Meanwhile, total goods trade rose 2.9% year-on-year. Notably, these achievements come despite persistent global uncertainty. What's driving China's growth amid an increasingly complex international landscape? How resilient is its foreign trade, and what are the key challenges and priorities for the remainder of the year? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Hong Hao, Managing Partner and CIO of Lotus Asset Management, David Mahon, Executive Chairman of Mahon China Investment, and Harald Buchmann, founder of Low Altitude Economy News. Welcome to Dialogue. Hong Hao, I will start with you. So if you look at the numbers, 5.3% for the first half, that's pretty strong, I would say. Is that what you expected?
Well, I think it exceeded the market expectation. I think the set of numbers driven in part by very strong export numbers and also very strong industrial output numbers, and also above scale enterprises that also register a very decent earnings growth as well. So I would say overall, it exceeded expectation, but then it also revealed the challenges for the second half.
Well, David, of course, the Chinese government since late last year, of course, they did take some measures to boost the domestic consumption, and amid, of course, uncertainty of a tariff war with the U.S. Seems so the economy does benefit from probably the ceasefire between the two countries in terms of the tariffs.
To some extent, I think the major benefit is that the investment by the government has been very targeted. And so the supply side support has been strong. But then we have a very long-term program playing out from the first Trump term, which is the diversification of the trade account. And China now is in probably a better position than any of the other major trading partners with the US, because it is truly diversified. And it's also put many companies into Southeast Asia. The private sector has made its own adjustments strategically. A lot of factors here, but on the consumption side, I think there are still weaknesses. Nonetheless, this is a genuine number. It exceeded our expectations by maybe 0.3, 0.4. It's pretty impressive, and I think we'll have a good year overall.
Harald, how do you look at these numbers, and what do you see as the key drivers behind the growth?
Well, it's definitely positive news, and it's in line with expectations, though on the upper side, definitely. And I think especially the export is very positive, as the other two also have mentioned. And one long-term important aspect, obviously, is the diversification away from the West. From 2012 onwards, the major trading partner, more than half of China's trade did go to or has gone to developing countries. And starting 2020, ASEAN has become the biggest trading bloc for China, bigger than the EU or the US. And I think this long-term strategy of exporting prosperity to the neighbors so they can become future customers, I think this is what has been paying off. And I think what still needs to improve further is now definitely the import numbers, because the overall trade grew by less than 3%, while exports have grown almost 6%. So there's definitely room on the import side. The question is, of course, with the structural readjustment of China moving rapidly upwards in the value chain, the question is, where will future imports come from?
Hong Hao, if you look at the export, overall, trade growth is 2.9%, but export to outside 5.9%, impressive number. Export to the U.S. Actually, also you see the rebound in June following this Geneva deal. And also diversification, we mentioned that. So diversification towards, say, South ASEAN countries, Southeast Asian countries, 10 of them, and the European Union, and Korea, South Korea, Japan, all registered, uptick. So that helped, obviously. I mean, you have more markets actually for the Chinese good there.
Yeah, well, I think so. Also, the new export destinations have been in development over the past couple of years. Because remember in 2018 we had the phase one tariff, and ever since then, well, back then China was in a very unfavorable situation in terms of bargaining process, right? So back then China didn't have many cards to play. But then later on, China tried to diversify its manufacturing base, and also strike new deals with the Asian countries and also with the European countries. So I think as a result, you can see export to the US is just down like 1/3, but then to the rest of the world is up by 1/3. It precisely offset the weakness of our exports to the US. But I would say that going into the second half, because China has achieved a certain level of success in the first half, right? So it would invite sort of a focused attention from European Union and also from the US as well. So, for example, Donald Trump is trying to strike deals with the alliances, trying to put new tariff on transshipping, and also put tariff on probably on factories that is majority owned by the Chinese entrepreneurs. So measures such as this, could put a stamp on the second half exports growth. So it remains to be seen, how we are going to overcome this kind of obstacle in the second half.
David, I guess people are looking at like August next month. There's a deadline between China and the U.S. to reach a deal. Do you also expect more uncertainty in terms of the tariffs from Washington?
Absolutely. Whatever they agree won't have any meaning, or should have no meaning strategically to companies, because Trump can change his mind a day later, a week later, a month later. So nothing is certain here. No one's word out of Washington has any real value. Prime Minister Starmer found that when he spent quite some time trying to negotiate with Trump, get a deal for Britain, only to find, without being told in advance, that all the deals are off. So I think it was around steel. They had a deal on steel, and then he just whacked a tariff on it one day, whimsically and randomly. So I don't think the Chinese government and serious companies are too focused on the outcomes in August. I think the view is now much longer than that, which it should be. And China is getting more resilient, more independent, and more genuinely diversified in its commercial relationships. So the more America does this, the more it actually fortifies and focuses Chinese companies and the government.
So Harold, in a sense, it's really up to a certain degree, to the Chinese side, how to manage the challenge posed, from Washington, in terms of relationship with the European Union and also the U.S. Punitive tariff on the countries for transshipment. For example, 40% on the Vietnamese goods, if there's so-called transshipment of Chinese goods. We don't know like an exact definition of what is a transshipment, but anyway, it caused some uncertainty.
Yes. So I think the times where we could just discuss business and economy separate from geopolitics, I think these times are over. I think right now it's really geopolitical economy that's the topic, and it's really mixed together. In a way, ironically, all these measures, these tariffs, asset freezes of Russian assets, or these transshipment tariffs, etc., tariffs on all the other countries, not just China, by the US, and also discussions in Europe of tariffs to offset whatever might come now from capacity in China that doesn't go to the US anymore, that could come to Europe. All these measures from, let's call it the Western countries, lead actually to a situation that is very interesting for China if China pursues further diversification, because the Southeast Asians aren't dumb people. They know that what's happening to China will eventually happen to them, or is happening to them as well. And so they may seek closer integration with the reliable partner, which in this case is China. Then you know how China has brokered the peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which opens up a new area in Western Asia for prosperity and trade. Trade talks with Africa, trade talks with Latin America. China is doing a lot to really open up new regions and help them develop to get to the point where they are good trading partners for Chinese finished goods. So I agree with the other speakers that it's not a short-term topic of, you know, how can we tweak things here and there to get nice numbers in the second half of this year. It's really a strategic topic of who stands with the global majority.
Well, Hong Hao, of course, we do see the strong growth too in terms of trade with Belt and Road countries. At the same time, you know, the Chinese officials have emphasized, quote, quality improvement in trade. You know, do you know what kind of export reflects probably the, you know, that kind of definition, quality improvement in trade regarding the China's export?
Yeah, well, I think these days China has really upgraded its manufacturing industry. For example, the value added by the Chinese manufacturing industry is bigger than, you know, the G7 combined, right? So the Chinese manufacturing value added is 1/3 of the global manufacturing sector, which is just phenomenal. I think, you know, because of this, as a result, you know, China is exporting more sophisticated value-added, high value-added goods to the rest of the world. You know, for example, Chinese EV, the Chinese solar panel, and also you know, many of the sort of semiconductor chips as well. Even though it's less sophisticated, you know, but it's essential input, essential components for many car manufacturings and also airplane and missiles manufacturings. So, you know, I would say that, you know, over the past couple of years, you know, China has really upgraded its manufacturing industry, in part, you know, because of the phase one trade war, and also because of, you know, in the past 7 years, and also in the past 3 years, you know, because of the COVID, and also because of the difficulty in the Chinese property sector, it redirect the investment efforts into the high value added manufacturing sectors, and now it's bearing fruits. So one shouldn't be too surprised to see, you know, China continue to make inroad into, you know, many of these high value add industries, and I think it would bring good for the rest of the world in terms of much lower high value added goods costs for the rest of the world.
Well, speak of that, Hong Hao, you know, there is a piece in New York Times today. Basically, they are warning the U.S. government for the next wave of the so-called China shock 2.0.
That's right.
You know, the competition,
Yes.
basically, you know, of higher value goods
Yes.
or industrial, industrial output of advanced technologies there. How do you see that? Do you think China remains competitive?
Yeah, well, I think by now, you know, everybody sort of figure out, you know, it's very difficult to beat, right? So even in the car manufacturing sector, for example, you know, one Chinese company has taken over Toyota as the world's #1 car exporter, and also in Europe, car manufacturing, which is a traditional high value add industry, and now is being sort of encroached by Chinese manufacturers as well. So, you know, I would say that even though Donald Trump trying to put very high tariff on Chinese exports, but because, you know, the competitive advantage of the Chinese industry is so far apart that, you know, 40% tariff is not gonna sort of fill the gap between the Chinese industry and the rest of the world. So I think, you know, in this case, you know, because Donald Trump sort of see a huge trade deficit is a sort of a weakness for the U.S. and trying to use tariff to fill the gap. But I would say that, you know, if you look at the U.S. trade number, right? So the U.S. service industry is still enjoying a surplus, but then the U.S. goods sector is seeing a deficit. So trying to use tariff, you know, to fill the gap, but at the same time ignoring the surplus that the U.S. industry is enjoying in terms of servicing the rest of the world, is sort of, you know, it's a very unbalanced view of the U.S. economic structure. So I would say that, you know, it's very difficult to catch up with the Chinese industry's progress, even with very high tariff. But then at the same time, I think for China, besides exporting high value-added goods, China should be focused on improving its service sector as well.
Well, Harald, you were nodding your head. We know that at the end of this month, there is going to be a summit between Chinese leaders and European leaders. Any expectation? Of course, we are also seeing rising frictions between the two sides in terms of, for example, government procurement of medical equipment, that kind of limitation.
Yes, so I just wanted to add one point. Obviously, this whole value upgrade of the Chinese industry is one part of the entire friction. Now, I'm not one to argue that China should be prevented from rising and join the ranks of the advanced economies in terms of production. That's not the point. The point is that China now poses new competition for Europe and the US that they're not used to, and that scares them. And it makes sense to scare them because, as Han just said, it's very difficult for European companies to compete against Chinese. Now, I don't think protectionism is the answer. That will just make Europe become even less competitive in the long run. So the question is, what can Europe do? And the other question is, what can China negotiate with Europe? Because, of course, many people are asking the question, who is really in charge in Europe? Should we talk to the individual governments in a China plus one fashion, or should we talk to the EU? And how much of these talks will last until the next meeting of the Europeans with the Americans, because their influence of the US in Europe is very, very strong. So these are some challenges that I'm honestly not very optimistic. I think one thing in the midterm that may happen and perhaps should happen is the currency adjustment to have the renminbi track closer with the euro rather than with the US dollar. As you know, the US dollar has declined more than 10% versus the euro, and the renminbi has trended very close to the US dollar and therefore made Chinese products in Europe cheaper yet again, and European imports to China yet more expensive. So this is something that could be structurally adjusted in the relatively short term. In the mid and long term, I think it's really a question of where is Europe hoping to go to stay competitive globally.
Right, that's an interesting topic, the topic for another time. David, we know that the Australian Prime Minister is in China, for the visit there. Obviously, I mean, beyond the United States, you do see countries, especially in the European countries and the Asia-Pacific region, are very much committed to free trade. I mean, that case in point is like China, Australia, China, New Zealand.
I think that's correct. I would committed to free trade. I think they benefit from free trade, and New Zealand and Australia, of course, have free trade agreements with China. But the Australian Prime Minister Albanese he's bringing a lot of contradiction with him. Here's a man who signed the AUKUS Pact, which is signing up to a coalition, a nuclear submarine coalition against China. Also, Australia's been a major participant in wargaming exercises against China, and it is pronounced that it's basically a tight ally with the US in the region. We know that Washington has just asked for Australia to say where it would stand in a conflict over Taiwan. My own country, New Zealand, has been perhaps less demonstrative, but in the same way it's slid towards Washington in the last 18 months. Europe also is very much worried about the war in Ukraine and the health of NATO and US support for NATO. So actually, if China looks at all these trading partners, they are fair weather friends when it comes to the politics of it. I don't know how Albanese is going to deal with this contradiction of, I'm helping America prepare for war with you. By the way, we really are good friends and let's trade more. Now, it's a pretty difficult thing to carry off. As far as Europe's concerned, the sycophantal support of the head of NATO for Donald Trump a week or so ago is one of the most cringeworthy things I think most of us have heard in diplomacy. And I agree with Harald, at the moment, Europe's not on a great path. It could have formed up with China. Trump's tariffs on everybody could have shown some unity over all the years of benefit. It really hasn't. There's not a lot of political courage in Europe. So China's going to have to navigate as it is with a handful of countries that it can rely on. I don't think these so-called developed Western countries are reliable, including my own.
Well, it's a case in point of how challenging, geopolitical situation or geoeconomic situation right now we are all in, including China, probably. But Hong Hao, if you look at the domestic situation, of course, we mentioned about, government investment, of course, stimulating economic growth, and also big projects, probably high-speed rail lines, etc. What about if you look at the CPI, Consumer Price Index? It rose 0.1% the first time compared to the same time last year. This is the first rise in 4 months. But at the same time, PPI, Producer Price Index, actually plunged to 3.6%, the sharpest decline in almost 2 years. How do you make this, the numbers here?
Yeah, well, I think the June CPI was benefiting from the government subsidy in terms of people purchasing electronics and PCs and all that. So people really went out of their way to upgrade their computers in June. So I think as a result, the national subsidies, for buying this kind of merchandise, is rapidly running out. And I think in the second half, there's a good chance that we'll see another round of consumption stimulus in this area, probably expanding the scope of these subsidies to include, for example, cash for clunker for cars, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say that, the June CPI, if it were not for the national subsidies, it could have been negative. So I think the situation is quite severe in the upstream sectors, which has been in deflation for almost 3 years. It's a sign that the Chinese overcapacity issue is getting rather sort of challenging. So I think as a result, recently, a series of important meetings has been held at a very top level, and the term anti-involution now is in sort of circulation. So people are really paying attention to involution due to excess capacity in many of the sectors. And also, a new round of excess capacity reduction is ongoing in the upstream sectors as well. So I think in 2017, we have the first round of excess capacity reduction in the Chinese economy, and the result was quite good, right? So in 2007, the economy responded, price come back to life, and also the stock market had a really good run in the second half of 2016 and 2017, the full year, all the way until the first phase of trade war started. So I would say that in second half of the year, anti-involution, reducing excess capacity would be focus of the government work in the second half. If we could successfully reduce some of the outdated capacity and also some excess capacity, we should see probably 12 months later, then we should see a recovery in the CPI, the Chinese CPI numbers.
David, in a sense, people also describe that as like a vicious competition among producers, including that, of course, EVs, etc. That created, of course, let's say, a negative effect to the economy, a pressure, contributing to deflationary pressure there. Do you agree with Hong Hao? Basically, for the next half, that would be the focus of the Chinese government?
I think he's identified the fundamental issue. It's a very bad situation when you have effective dumping of goods, which is what this excess capacity is. If there was more governance of the economy that prevented this, it's really non-market practices. I look at the dairy industry very closely for our dairy clients, and basically milk is being sold below the cost of its production, which is dumping. China gets challenged for dumping globally. Often it's not the case. This is a domestic dilemma. And I think reducing capacity to allow companies to make money, to allow people to be employed with more certainty, and then allow those companies to invest is a very good thing for the economy. So it's time for regulation or the application of regulation in key sectors. So this overcapacity isn't an issue. China's benefited from intense competition. Again, the reference to EVs is very relevant. We ended up with BYD because now Xiaomi, because we had this ruthless competition over actually a couple of decades. But there comes a point where that's a high price to produce excellence. It's a high price to give birth to winners. So I think now we need to be a lot more disciplined around not allowing companies that are losing money, therefore selling at very, very low prices. All this will help things. But the last thing is there's a systemic issue, which is of many decades here. China's urbanization was more rapid than any in history. People became house owners, householders at a rate that, again, there's no precedent to this. The investment in real estate has many sources, but that as an overhang is not just the hubris of the last decade. It's something to do with the whole way that China got it stood up again and it rebuilt its economy. This has to come out of the system. And I think more can be done around the areas of cost to people's lives. And the discipline I do appreciate is that the government is not trying to go back and help the property sector. It's looking at where consumption can be addressed. So help with the pension system, make it less expensive for people to save for health. There's many tools at the government's disposal.
A real challenge over there. At the same time, the government is looking at new growth point in its economy, and one of that area, of course, is a low altitude economy. I know, Harald, you are in the area. Tell us, what is a low altitude economy and where is China now?
Yes, I just want to present a slightly different viewpoint. Instead of talking of overcapacity, we can talk of under consumption or under sales, because there are a lot of people who would like to own more, to get more, to have more within China and globally. So the question is how to allow those people to actually get the things that they want. It's not that much too many are produced. Many people would love to get a car. Now, the low altitude economy is this idea of opening up a new economic space, the 1,000 meters low airspace, for drone deliveries, logistics, infrastructure supervision. Instead of walking past high voltage electricity line on foot to check their quality, you can have drones fly along them and check everything at much lower cost. And then the eVTOLs, electric, like helicopters, flying taxis that could take people within cities, from the city center to the airport, for example, or to the high-speed railway station. This is a whole area of economic space that China is now working on regulation to ensure the safety, which will then allow a whole range of suppliers from, air management, airspace management providers, platforms, to the producers of drones, to the service providers who run these drone services, et cetera, to really start economic activity in the airspace above the cities. And I think that's really the right way to go, rather than to reduce production, to make production in a way that it benefits the people.
So an increased induction in certain actors, like the low altitude economy, right?
Yes.
Well, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.